Muy buenas tardes a todos. Agradecemos nuevamente que nos acompañen a este último webinar del día de hoy, denominado Tips for Shock Testing. Corresponde a la serie de webinars que CITEC ha preparado para ustedes en este denominado CITEC October Test 2020, evento virtual que estamos preparando y realizando para ustedes en esta semana y la próxima, los días miércoles, jueves y viernes. Estaremos comenzando en un par de minutos más con la ponencia a través de Vibration Research. Y bueno, les agradecemos nuevamente que estén con nosotros. Muy buenas tardes nuevamente. Vamos a comenzar con el webinar denominado Tips para pruebas de shock. Es nuestro último webinar del día de hoy, viernes 23 de octubre. Como los comentaba anteriormente, este forma parte de nuestro evento online denominado CITEC October Test 2020, en donde pues tratamos de traer lo mejor para ustedes en el mundo de las pruebas y las mediciones, y bueno, así se puedan ver contenido adicional que les puede servir para las pruebas en su laboratorio. Agradecemos esta vez, como ya en algunas ocasiones anteriores nos ha acompañado, mi amigo y colega Ryan Becker, ingeniero de aplicaciones internacional para Vibration Research. Él está ubicado actualmente en Estados Unidos y atiende principalmente el mercado latinoamericano y asiático. Y bueno, mi nombre es Leonardo Bonilla, ingeniero de CITEC. Nosotros vamos a estar llevando a cabo este webinar, principalmente en inglés por parte de Ryan, y bueno, estaremos dando algún resumen de los puntos principales de los temas en español. Y bueno, siéntanse con toda la confianza de hacer cualquier pregunta referente al tema o aportación hacia el mismo. Agradecemos nuevamente su participación y pues comenzamos. Muchas gracias, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Leonardo. Excited to be here and excited to be part of October Test. Today we have an exciting topic. We're talking about shock, as Leonardo mentioned. This is the second part of our series. So we did sign on Wednesday, and we'll do random next Thursday. So I hope you can join us then as well. But let's jump in. I know it's Friday afternoon and you all want to get home quickly to your family, so we'll make this quick and hopefully you can all learn something. So today we'll be talking about shock testing in general. We'll look at what is shock testing, what are the basic things that we need to know about a shock test to be able to run it. We'll characterize the different types of shock pulses. We'll look at the pre and post pulse compensation that we have to run when we're running on a shaker system. We'll look at the shock profile entry tips. So what are some things that we need to think about when we are actually creating a shock profile? And then we'll look at transient capture as well. So capturing data from a shock test. Okay, let's jump into the intro here. So first off, what is shock testing? Well, shock tests are a sharp transfer of energy into a mechanical system to test the system's capability, right? So test how it can survive a big drop, a hit, an impact, or any type of transient vibration event. This can be a very short time duration, up to upwards of a minute. 3 different devices that we commonly think of when we're running shock tests. I have put images on the slide here. The first one is an electrodynamic shaker. You'll see here with a fixture and then what looks like a rotor as well. Then we see 2 types of drop shock machines, which we'll talk about as well.
¿Qué son las pruebas de shock? Las pruebas de shock son la transferencia de energía de una manera muy rápida hacia nuestro producto en cuestión, el producto que vamos a probar. Existen algunas maneras de llevar a cabo este tipo de pruebas, como lo vemos en las imágenes, con shakers electrodinámicos, que es el tema que vamos a estar abordando principalmente el día de hoy. Drop testers también, que se utilizan principalmente para aplicaciones de empaque, y mechanical shock, que es la última imagen de la derecha.
Perfect. All right, so when we're characterizing a shock pulse, what are the things that we need to know about it? So number one is we need to know the acceleration of that pulse. We also need to know the pulse width, the duration, the rise and fall time. We're going to look at when we're analyzing the pulse, we'll analyze the velocity change. We'll need to know the pulse shape. Is it half sine, initial peak? We'll look at the Fourier spectrum. So we'll also need to understand when we're running a shock test, what are the frequency domain implications of that test, right? And the frequency domain implications of the pulse shape that we choose. Also, we can look at SRS, the shock response spectrum. So defining the pulse not in the time domain, but in the frequency domain.
Para caracterizar nuestro pulso de shock, tenemos que conocer la amplitud, duración, el tiempo de subida y bajada, la velocidad de cambio, el tipo de pulso que vamos a configurar, y también de manera adicional puede ser el espectro de Fourier, y también podemos ver el pulso en el dominio de la frecuencia con el Shock Response Spectrum.
Okay, so when we're talking about shock, what are the types of pulses that we commonly see, especially when we're talking about ones that are run on a shaker? Well, we see things like half sine, initial peak, terminal peak, square, triangle, sawtooth, all types of different pulse types. In the next few slides, what we're going to do is analyze those and see what's the benefit of running one or another. So let's get into the first one. By far the most common is the half sine pulse. This is what we call the traditional method of sine testing, fairly easy to reproduce. The frequency response is fairly smooth, but what we see is reduced high frequency content, or what we call holes in the higher frequency. So what that means is if we have a product with resonances that are in the higher frequencies, if we're using this pulse, we may not excite those. So let's look at an alternative. So the terminal peak, also known as the sawtooth shock pulse, many of the newer test specifications are using terminal peak rather than half sine. And the reason for that is the sharp point and peak increases the amount of high frequency content. So what we see are fewer holes or a flatter spectrum. Then finally, another less common option is the trapezoidal shock pulse. And this further increases that high frequency content, but we also get high velocity and displacement. So let's say if we look at these three pulse types in the frequency domain, so we'll look here at these PSDs, we can see that the half sine, this is the green wave, terminal peak is the red, and the trapezoidal is the black. We can see here, if we look at the half sine, the green, when we get to the higher frequencies, so from 100 to 500, we start to see these big dips or holes in the frequency. Well, as if you remember earlier, we said that if you're running a half sine pulse, you may not excite some of the higher frequency resonances. And the reason is because these pulses. So for example, if you see 150 hertz resonance on your product, well, if you ran this pulse, unfortunately, in this test, that would not have been excited with that shock test. So the most damaging frequency was not even being excited for that test. But if we look at terminal peak or trapezoidal, right here, in turn, we would still see the energy there, and that would still be excited during the shock pulses.
Así es. Esas son las formas de pico que podamos encontrar directamente en las pruebas de shock. Tenemos half sine, terminal peak y trapezoidal. En las diapositivas pasadas vimos cómo se comporta cada uno, cuál es la forma de pico que tiene. Y aquí podemos visualizar cuáles son los beneficios de usar una u otra de acuerdo a su comportamiento en el dominio de la frecuencia. El ejemplo que nos ponía Ryan es que en el half sine, si tenemos un producto que tenga un punto de resonancia en alguna frecuencia alta, por ejemplo aquí en alrededor de 120 Hz, con ese tipo de forma no lo podríamos estar analizando y visualizando de una mejor manera. Sin embargo, a través de terminal peak o trapezoidal, vemos que el comportamiento en alta frecuencia es mucho mejor y más óptimo.
Okay, what are some other pulse types that we see? Well, we'll see the square, triangle, Haversine, trapezoidal. And if we look at those, we can also analyze them in the frequency domain. And we see as well, they have different responses. Some of them have very high frequency responses. Some have more energy in the low frequency. But here we can understand how that pulse is going to affect our product.
Sí, es. Al igual que la imagen pasada, aquí tenemos otras formas de shock que podamos implementar. Son realmente menos utilizadas, pero bueno, pues aquí existen como tal. Y estamos hablando de las triangulares, trapezoidales, cuadradas y Haversine. De igual manera podemos ver el comportamiento en el dominio de la frecuencia en este rango, en cada una de estas formas de shock.
Okay, next we're going to talk about the pulse compensation. And so if you've ever run a shock pulse on a shaker, you'll see that you don't only see the big pulse that we just discussed, right? You also see a little pulse before and after. Well, why do we need that? Why does that exist? Well, it's needed because we need to return the shaker back to the zero position, right? So at the end of the test, we want acceleration, velocity, and displacement all to return back to zero, right? It also allows us to use more of the displacement of the shaker. So if you look here, if we're running this test, if we were not doing any type of pulse, and let's say assume that we could do that, and we had the pulse just start from here, the midpoint of the shaker, we would only have half of that, actually I should say displacement here, we would only be able to use up to half of what the shaker has to offer, right? In this case, we get to use a little bit more of the displacement, so we utilize more of the maximum displacement of the shaker with that method. But we need to also understand how the pulse compensation changes the shock pulse and distorts the spectrum.
Aquí vemos algo muy interesante que podemos ver aquí, es la compensación del pulso. Usualmente lo que nosotros vemos y en lo que nos enfocamos pues es en el pulso central que nos interesa reproducir. Sin embargo, la compensación antes y después de que esto ocurra es muy importante para llevar de cero al inicio al final nuestro shaker electrodinámico y podamos tener una reproducción más confiable del shock que estamos viendo inducido a nuestro producto. Aquí podemos ver en las tres gráficas cómo está configurado el pulso. Después está la velocidad y el desplazamiento, cómo se estaría comportando nuestro shaker electrodinámico.
Okay, so again, why do we use it? Well, what would happen if we don't use any pulse compensation when we're running a test? Now, I will say with the majority of controllers, when you're defining the test, it's already going to be defining the pre and post compensation. But let's say if you could run a test without it, what would happen? Well, what would happen is your acceleration would increase and then decrease back to zero, but your velocity and your displacement would continue to rise. So there'd be nothing to stop that movement of the shaker. So what would end up happening is eventually the shaker would just hit the limit, would end up just hitting the hard mechanical limit of the shaker, which is obviously not a good thing for our test here.
Así es, si no existe una compensación en el pulso, lo que estaríamos viendo es una respuesta aleatoria de nuestro shaker, pudiendo estos exceder los límites mecánicos del mismo y pues se verían también influenciados por otro tipo de fuerzas como la de la gravedad, por la misma masa del equipo. Entonces sería una señal en donde no tendríamos el control de qué es lo que está pasando directamente en la prueba.
Okay, so why don't we then just put one pulse after the main pulse? Well, unfortunately, if we look at it here with one big pulse, this is the acceleration, and then we see a little pulse at the end, a small burst of acceleration here. What we see is that the velocity returns to zero, but the displacement doesn't. So unfortunately, if we tried to run it this way, the displacement would not return to zero on our shaker with only one pulse.
Así es. ¿Por qué no poner un pulso después de la compensación? Porque, bueno, la velocidad se pretende que se lleve a cero y el desplazamiento no sería, en este caso, cero.
Okay, so why would we ever purposefully do that? The pre-pulse only, there are some applications where they want to see what's happening with the product. So for example, a hard disk drive, what they want to see is that right after the pulse, the main pulse, is see if they can still read and write before there's another small pulse again, if you will. Then also for post-pulse, for an airbag sensor, sometimes they don't want to give any type of pulse before the main one because they want to make sure that the main pulse is what's triggering it. They don't want to preload the sensor and invalidate the test. So there are some applications for tests that do not use both pre and post pulse compensation, but they're very specific.
Hay algunas aplicaciones muy especiales en donde podemos llevar a cabo análisis tanto en el pulso previo y en el pulso posterior. Por ejemplo, para disk drives test podemos utilizar el pre-pulse y requieren también una verificación de lectura. Esa es una aplicación muy específica. De igual manera, para el sensor de detonación de las bolsas de aire, se puede con el pulso posterior medir ahí el nivel de trigger que puede llevar a cabo el sensor.
Okay, so the typical shaker test, as you know, uses 2 pulses. As we can see in the graph on the right, we can see the acceleration, velocity, and displacement overlaid. As we run the test, all 3 acceleration, velocity, and displacement return to 0 at the end of the test, right? So when we look at selecting this inside of the Vibration View software, there are 2 options to the type of pre and post pulse that you can select. So one is what we call our smooth shape, and that's here on the top. And the next one is called our square shape. And one is designed specifically to reduce the amount of high frequency content that's added to the test. Whereas in the square shape, it's designed to be optimal for minimizing velocity and displacement. Our default is the square shape. That's what's recommended. We also have these 2 without displacement centering. That would be for very, very small amount of people that have an external device that is recentering their shaker.
Para lo que ya comentamos de los pulsos de compensación, también en nuestro software Vibration View podemos definir la forma que va a tener nuestro pulso anterior y pulso posterior, tal como lo vemos en las imágenes de la derecha.
Okay, so let's actually look at a video. So remember, we're not going to be able to visually see the acceleration. So what we want to look at is the displacement, because the displacement is what we're seeing on the shaker. So let's watch for displacement that goes up, down, up again, and then returns back to the original point. So let's look at this short video. Up, down, up again. Up, down, up. So let's look at that one more time here. Let that finish up. Up, down, up. And so if you'll see right there, it's at the midpoint, goes up, down, up again, returns back to that middle point. And so the pre and post pulse allows us to get that nice transition that we're expecting. Okay, what are some other things that we need to consider when we're running a test? This is something that we put on all of our presentations because we think it's very important to consider. This isn't only related to shock, but it's related to any of the vibration tests that you're running. So you need to understand that noise can cause many types of issues during your test. So if you're having abort problems, anything like that, we'd recommend, and especially if you're running low-level tests, so not high-level acceleration tests, you want to look at these 3 things. So eliminating ground loops, making sure your shaker, head expander, and fixture are designed with an appropriate resonance for the test you're running. And then also make sure you're selecting the correct accelerometer. So here you might see ground loops in your lab. If you don't have a single grounding point in your lab, what that means is that you have all of the equipment, the controller, the power amplifier, the shaker, all connected together and then running to one single ground point. Instead of the controller is plugged in one spot, the amplifier in another, And now the only thing connecting them are my input cables and my drive cable, because we don't want current to be pulled through those cables.
Así es, tal como lo hemos estado considerando en cada uno de los webinars que tenemos acerca de las pruebas de vibración, algo muy importante que no dejaríamos de mencionar es tener cuidado con el ruido y minimizarlo lo más posible. Como ya lo hemos visto, tenemos que eliminar los lazos de tierra que se puedan presentar entre el sensor, el controlador, el amplificador y el shaker electrodinámico. Como vemos en la imagen, pues aquí están conectados todos a diferente punto de tierra, lo cual tenemos que evitar tratando de conectar todo el sistema de vibración a un solo punto de tierra y evitamos así tener ruido en el sistema.
Perfect. Again, we also want to understand what is the resonant frequency of my shaker, my head expander, and my fixture. You can do very simple sine sweep tests to understand the dynamics, but these are one things that you should know already about your system so that your fixture is not moving during your test and causing inaccurate results.
Así es, también tenemos que verificar cuáles son las puntos o frecuencias de resonancia de nuestro shaker, head expander, fixture, y así en lo que corresponde a las pruebas de shock, también asegurarnos de que no haya ninguna resonancia en donde estemos probando con shock. Y bueno, esto puede devenir en que si llega a haber algo similar, el fixture puede quedarse vibrando o sonando directamente después de que haya cumplido el proceso, el pulso de shock, y eso nos podría perjudicar en los valores finales.
Okay, and finally, for all test types, you want to make sure you're selecting the proper accelerometer. So work together with your distributor. CTEC is selling Dytran accelerometers. If you're looking for an accelerometer, make sure that you're buying one for the purpose that you're going to use it. So make sure that the acceleration limits are correct for that test. Make sure it's designed to support the frequency range that you're going to be exciting in the test.
Sí, otro factor importante que tenemos que cuidar es la selección adecuada del sensor para nuestra prueba de shock. Es decir, si tenemos una prueba que requiera medir 20 Gs, tenemos que asegurarnos que el sensor esté diseñado para pruebas de shock con un rango mayor a 20 Gs. Es decir, que pueda tener 50 Gs o en ese rango, para que podamos tener mediciones confiables y confirmar los otros límites del acelerómetro, como son la frecuencia y bueno, como ya lo comentamos, que esté diseñado específicamente para pruebas de shock.
Okay, back to the shock world here. Let's look at entering a shock profile. What are the things that we need to know? So in our software, when you first open a shock test, it'll open to what we call our quick test mode. And so this is set up with the minimum amount of information that we need to be able to run a simple shock test. So you see here, you need to enter the pulse width, pulse type, amplitude, the direction, how many pulses, how much time between the pulses, the control, and then of course, what are the limits. Down at the bottom, you also see what are the max values of that test. One thing that you should always be checking when you're setting up a test, you should always be checking the max values of that test and make sure that they look correct for your test, right? Because it's very easy to accidentally enter one number wrong, but fortunately, you'll sometimes see that show up as a very large displacement, or maybe the acceleration looks huge. You'll be able to catch a lot of errors that way.
Así es como luce la parte donde podemos entrar los datos de la prueba de shock en Vibration View de Vibration Research y podemos colocar cada uno de los valores del estándar que queremos reproducir. Tenemos siempre que considerar, evaluar y ver si estamos cumpliendo con los valores máximos que queremos en la parte de abajo, en la aceleración en Gs, velocidad en metros sobre segundo, y verificar que todo esto se encuentre de manera adecuada para poder llevar a cabo la prueba.
Okay, now if we look at the advanced mode, so this is fully customizing our test setup. What are some of the things that I can select? The first thing we like to talk about are the tolerance and abort limits. So one nice thing about the Vibration View software is we always keep the latest version up to date with the latest testing standards. And for example, here you can see we have about 8 different common shock testing standards that you can automatically select, and that'll automatically apply the tolerance and abort. So we'll look at what that means. So here's an example. Between MIL standard 810G and MIL standard 810F shock test, you'll see that they've significantly changed both the tolerance and the abort lines. And so to make sure that you're running the test correctly, based upon the specification, make sure that you're selecting the correct tolerance and limits.
Este es otro de los beneficios que nos brinda Vibration View. Podemos elegir de acuerdo al estándar que queremos correr. Aquí hay un ejemplo de normas militares, en donde automáticamente el software prepara el sistema de acuerdo a los límites de abort que estarían permitidos para cada una de estas estándar, lo cual nos permitiría correr de una manera más sencilla nuestro test.
Okay, what are some of the other parameters that we need to configure? I won't go too deep into these, but you need to configure the feedback control. And what the feedback control is, it tells us how big of jump to make when we're doing the startup pulses. So as you know, the controller doesn't just directly come out and do a full pulse, right? It has to come out and start with a little pulse and make it a little bigger, make it a little bigger, learn about the shaker, right? And so that's what the feedback control will do. Next, we have filtering, which will allow you to remove unwanted frequencies. So especially with our integration and differentiation filter, what that does is, especially when we're converting and calculating the velocity and the displacement, we need to make sure that those unwanted frequencies aren't coming into our data. Next, we can set sample rate. And finally, one useful feature here that can be useful if you're testing products that have some type of ringing or have some type of response after the pulse, you can capture additional time after that pulse. So an example would be if you imagine something like ringing a bell and that bell rings for some time. If you wanted to capture all of that after the initial pulse, you can add that time here. So that's one tip to get more time after the shock pulse.
En parámetros avanzados del software tenemos en la retroalimentación de control, en donde podemos colocar una ventana de frecuencias en donde nos interesa tener la retroalimentación de la prueba. Por otro lado, también tenemos algunos filtros que podemos configurar, donde podemos remover las frecuencias que no deseamos que se expresen en nuestra prueba y pueden afectar los resultados. Y por último, también hay una herramienta muy interesante que nos va a permitir capturar información adicional después del pulso. Y como lo podemos ver en la parte derecha, solamente tenemos que considerar el tiempo que requerimos después de que se lleve a cabo la prueba para ver qué está pasando de manera adicional.
Okay, And so whenever we talk about shock, we also like to make sure that we let you know that we do not recommend that you run multi-channel control for shock tests. And there are a couple of reasons. One, it actually puts your shaker at risk for damage. We can apply the system limits to multiple channels, so that does protect it to some extent. But if there's some nonlinearities in the placement, you could have an issue with the shaker. So use only one control channel when you're doing a shock test. Another possible issue is because of the phase difference between the locations of the accelerometers, that can cause issues with control. So use one accelerometer, one control accelerometer when you're running a shock test.
Bueno, eso se puede resumir en que les recomendamos utilizar un solo acelerómetro de control para sus pruebas de shock.
Okay. Now, another tool that can be very useful is what is called the memorized drive. And what is memorized drive? What it does is after you run a pulse, it can remember what was the drive signal like for that pulse. And so next time you want to run that test, that same pulse, you don't have to wait for those startup pulses. So this is very, very useful for applications like a satellite, where we want to only subject the satellite to exactly the shock pulse that we want for 10 times. We don't want 3 smaller pulses before that we have to consider in our analysis. We only want the 10, right? So what we can do is we can, instead of putting the satellite on the shaker, we put a dummy weight. So a weight that is the same as the satellite. We run one pulse, and then what it does is it'll memorize the drive from that pulse. We'll stop, and then you remove the dummy weight, put on the satellite, and now you can run the test, and it will just run 10 pulses because it will have the drive already memorized.
Así es, esta es una herramienta muy interesante que se utiliza en aplicaciones muy especiales, como lo acaba de mencionar Ryan. Imaginemos un satélite donde no queremos que haya pulsos antes ni después, sino que sean los pulsos reales que se van a llevar a cabo en la prueba. ¿Qué es lo que hacemos aquí? Ponemos una masa similar a la que representa el satélite y llevamos a cabo la prueba. Una vez que se lleve a cabo la prueba, utilizamos el módulo de memorización de software. ¿Para qué? Para que el controlador sepa qué tanta fuerza requiere para mover esa masa, y una vez que pongamos el producto real, que es el satélite, no nos otorgue los 3 pulsos iniciales que son para adecuar el nivel de potencia del shaker electrodinámico. Entonces vamos a tener únicamente los pulsos que son al 100% de potencia en la prueba.
Yep, perfect. And one thing that's very nice is you only need to do that once. So you can use this use drive for first level button. And once you do that, what it will do is it will save that drive signal with the profile so that the next times you run the test, anytime in the future, it will still remember that drive. So you don't need to do the dummy weight every time. So this can benefit all types of tests. Next in the data, what are some interesting things, tips that we can do? One thing I would recommend is if you have to document the data from every pulse, you would come into our data tab and select every one pulse. So we do that. And then what's really cool is inside of the software, we can then very easily overlay all of those pulses either in our software or in Excel. And so if we were doing that in Excel, what we could use is there's a template that exists that would automatically take all of the 10 pulses and it would throw all the data in. It would show you each pulse and then also overlay that as well. So I'll show you what that looks like here. If you want to overlay the pulse data in Vibration View, And this works with any module, so sine, random, shock. You can use our paste from file feature. And in here, you go into edit, paste from file, and then you select all of the shock pulses that you would like to display at once. So once I select those, click open, it's automatically going to open with all of those pulses overlaid.
Así es. También podemos seleccionar y registrar los pulsos que nosotros queramos en el software con la herramienta que nos acaba de mostrar Ryan, y también llevar a cabo el análisis de todos estos pulsos en su conjunto.
Okay. Another tip that we like to recommend is when you're trying to analyze all of the pulses that you ran during a given test, we like to recommend the acceleration peak history graph. And so that can be selected simply in the graph window. So acceleration peak history. And here's an example of running this schedule. So running 10 pulses, then stopping, waiting for the operator, using our memorized drive, and then running 10 pulses again. So what do we see? Why do we see 23 pulses here, not 20? Well, that's because we have 3 startup pulses, right? The demand of the test is 2 Gs, but as I mentioned previously, whenever a test starts, it has to do smaller pulses and build up, right? So we can see actually what the control acceleration was for those pulses. Then we see the 10 that all met the demand, that all met the demand. Then we stopped for a couple seconds and then continued again for those 10. So this graph can let you see everything. Sometimes on reports, your customers will ask, hey, I would really like to see that you ran the 10 pulses. And this graph is one thing that's really nice. You can put it into the report and show all of the pulses that you ran to them directly.
Así es, esa es una herramienta muy útil y hace uso de lo que acabamos de ver de la memoria que le podemos dar a nuestra prueba. Aquí podemos ver que al inicio pues no se había hecho la prueba anteriormente, entonces tenemos los 3 pulsos iniciales que van subiendo la intensidad de la prueba hasta llegar al 100%, pero una vez que tenemos ya memoria de los primeros 10 pulsos, los siguientes 10 pulsos ya no requieren otra vez los 3 pulsos iniciales. Entonces, aquí podemos ver de manera completa nuestra prueba y generar un reporte en consecuencia.
Okay, finally, we're moving on to our last section, and this is just a quick conversation about transient capture. Transient capture can be done with the VR9500 controller, can also be done with the Observer 1000 product that we have. But this is where we're not typically doing any type of control, we're just measuring. So our goal is to capture the data from transient events using some type of defined trigger. So you'll see on the right here, 2 different drop shock machines. And what are the typical applications? Package testing, product life, and pass-fail production testing.
De igual manera tenemos la herramienta de Transient Capture, que principalmente se utiliza para estos 2 sistemas que vemos del lado derecho, que son equipos de drop test y mechanical shock. Y las aplicaciones principales pues son de pruebas de empaque, pruebas de vida del producto y pruebas de pasa-falla también.
Okay, because we're not outputting any signal that's being reproduced on a shaker, how do we define the pulse shape, right, when we're doing a drop shock test? Well, it's defined by the pad material that we use for the drop shock machine. So for example, here with a half sine, it's produced by a flat elastomer drop pad, whereas in Sawtooth, it's produced by a lead drop pad. Square and trapezoid, They're produced by air cylinders or crumple material. Pulse width can be defined by lighter objects, which will generally see a wider pulse. Then overall, of course, pads, the product itself, the frequency content present, the drop height, and if you're using some assist mechanism like bungee cords to achieve higher accelerations. So the design, the pad, this is all playing into what that shock pulse will look like.
En esos equipos, la forma del pulso se va a determinar por el material que esté debajo, en donde va a caer el equipo y se va a producir el impacto de shock. Entonces, de acuerdo a cada una de las formas, tenemos diferentes materiales que podemos estar utilizando y estos van a determinar la forma y duración del pulso.
Okay, so what are the things that we need to configure when we're running a transient capture test? Well, we need to define a trigger, right? So we can trigger on any channel. We can select a level, and then we need to select a slope for that pulse. We need to select the capture window. So how much data are we going to capture, or how much time are we going to capture, right? How much before that trigger is reached, the pre-trigger. Should we only take one pulse? Should we take many? Should we hold off between pulses, right? Do we need a filter, right? If we don't filter out our high frequency data, can it cause aliasing that will show up in lower frequencies, right? We need to also make sure that our sample rate is at least 10 times the analysis frequency, right? And that's to make sure that we get the most accurate result as possible. The faster we sample, the more accurate the peak should be when we're looking at a pulse. Frequency analysis, that's also going to define the analysis range that we're going to be looking at when we are looking in the frequency domain at that pulse.
Bueno, ese es el configurador que nosotros podemos ver en Vibration View. Olvidaba comentar que para Transient Capture podemos utilizar el controlador VR9500, que es el producto principal de Vibration Research, pero también podemos utilizar el Observer 1000, que es un equipo relativamente nuevo para este propósito y, bueno, para otras aplicaciones. Lo que podemos ver pues, es principalmente cómo configurar el trigger, es decir, qué canal es el que estaríamos utilizando para recibir la información del shock. De igual manera, la ventana que vamos a ver del shock antes y después del mismo. Y por supuesto, podemos generar también filtros de frecuencia, donde si tenemos una ventana mayor, podemos ver el espectro de cómo se comportó la prueba en una mayor, con una mayor cantidad de información.
Okay, what are some other features that are typically supported in transient capture? There can be an output pulse that is generated for modal excitation. So for example, if you need to hook a small shaker with a stinger, so it's essentially exciting some product and then reading that back, that can be done. Also, you can select shock pulse tolerances. So if you're running a shock pulse on some device and you need to confirm that that meets your shock pulse standard or whatever the shock standard you're testing to, what you can do is check that against that. Next, you can also do SRS analysis as well. So if you want to test your pulse against some SRS standard that you need to run to. Okay, this is actually the final slide here, but I'd like to open the floor in case anyone has any questions. I will be showing off some more of the resources that you can find from our website, and I'll show you that here. The one that I like to recommend the most is our webinar archive. So our blog is great. There's a lot of great content on there, but I would say at least once a month, we generate videos that cover every topic in great detail. So for example, if you want to learn more about shock, for example, if you have to run an SRS test, but you don't know anything about SRS, I recommend you come and watch this SRS video. If you want to learn more about basic shock testing, here's the fundamentals video. If you want to learn about transient capture, that's here. If you want to learn about anything, that's one nice thing in our software or on our website. You can just search for it. So for example, if we want to see what's out there just about shock in general, we can search shock and we can find different videos, different links to a blog post, classical shock testing, FAQ, test development for shock, SRS testing, electric vehicle battery testing. So this must be talking about doing shock testing for batteries. What is shock testing? Classical tests. So all of this information is free, available anytime on our website. So I'd highly recommend, if you're looking for information, make sure you go to our website and look at our webinars and make sure you search for the topic directly.
Así es, adicionalmente a este webinar, nos gustaría comentarles que todos estos recursos se encuentran directamente alojados en la página de Vibration Research, tanto webinars como casos de estudio, como algunos papers de investigación que han hecho maestros y doctores dentro de Vibration Research, se encuentran publicados aquí en la página. Y bueno, pues el propósito general de este webinar es que conozcan un poco más acerca de las bondades y facilidades que se pueden hacer actualmente en las pruebas de shock. Cualquier duda o comentario adicional a que pase este webinar, estamos a sus órdenes para resolverlo de manera pronta y lo más precisa posible. No sé si haya alguna pregunta referente al tema con la que podamos ayudarles. Bueno, al parecer no hay ninguna pregunta. Ryan, no sé si tú quieres agregar algo adicional. Ryan?
Yes, I just wanted to thank everyone for their time this Friday evening. Hope that you all have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us.
Muchas gracias a ti por tu participación y por tu apoyo siempre en estos eventos y con las dudas que surgen de las aplicaciones que nos dejan saber nuestros clientes. De igual manera, nos gustaría hacerles saber que la siguiente semana estaremos teniendo el complemento de lo que denominamos CITEC October Test de este mes de octubre, con 3 días continuos de conferencias, miércoles 28, jueves 29 y viernes 30. Nos va a acompañar también Ryan en el último webinar de la serie dedicado a tips para pruebas en seno, shock, y la siguiente semana sería random. De igual manera estará gente de Usoft presentándose con nosotros. Expertos de nuestro laboratorio de pruebas estarán dando algunos temas bastante importantes. Tendremos otra vez la presencia de Santiago Reyes, que es el ingeniero de aplicaciones y soporte en Graz, localizado en Dinamarca. Y bueno, esperamos contar con su valiosa participación en estos en estos webinars. Les agradecemos nuevamente su asistencia. Cualquier duda, comentario, retroalimentación siempre es bienvenido y deseamos que tengan un excelente fin de semana. Hasta la próxima.